Okay, we got a recording going.
Good morning, all. What does a doula, an officer in the Canadian Armed Forces, and a minister have in common? Now, this sounds like it should be the punchline to a joke, but instead, it is the winding path of discernment for my call to serve as a military chaplain. I joined the Canadian Armed Forces in March of 2005 as an officer in the cadet instructor cadre. Now, this is a branch of the military set aside for working directly with youth. It's mostly made up of reservists, part-time people in communities across the country who work and volunteer their time to mentor young people as they become good citizens and leaders. There's no training for deployments, and there are no moves unless they are voluntary. The training they receive is specific to working with youth, how to empower them, and how to set up boundaries to make sure that it's safe for all who participate. Formally, these officers are responsible for the administration and training delivery of the cadet program. And I've held a variety of positions at the local units where I worked, including a few years as the commanding officer. But I can tell you that the paperwork was often done at home because what the Spirit put in front of me was a call to serve in a different way. And this happened repeatedly, especially in my time working directly with the cadets themselves. I had opened the door to find a young woman crying on the bathroom floor. And so I joined her there to listen, decked out in my full dress uniform. On my way out one evening, we found a young boy who was hiding in the bushes, just outside the building where we met. The program was over and he knew that his parents weren't coming to pick him up for several more hours, and the staff weren't going to leave unless they saw everyone had already gone home. And early one afternoon, a young woman came through the doors crying. And when I asked her what was going on, she shared that she had just witnessed the shooting of her best friend at school that day, news that I had heard on the radio as I was heading into work. She chose to come to us before even going home. So together we called her parents so that they knew that she was safe, and we continued to talk for that entire evening gathering. This was important work in my life, knowing that I was asked to be a positive adult role model for those who were navigating the challenging teen years. I also didn't understand the ministry I was so clearly doing, but simply acting out of that place where my great joy and my great sadness met. Now, this was deeply meaningful work, but I'll let you in on a secret. It only pays 25 days a year. And so I needed another job. In my civilian job, I worked as a doula. I accompanied families of all shapes and sizes, providing physical, emotional, and spiritual support during pregnancy, birth, and the early weeks postpartum with a new baby. These were strangers who invited me into the sacred and vulnerable times in their lives as a caring witness and presence through uncertainty, fear, and pain. For me, this was beautiful and holy work. I remember joining a laboring couple at home who were Muslim, and they danced in their dimly lit kitchen to the sung Quran. And later, when we went to the hospital, I was asked to hold space for silence so that the father could whisper into the new baby's ear the call to prayer, so that they could hear the name of God as the very first words coming into the world. I also accompanied a woman who became a mother by choice, choosing to conceive a child without a partner. And she labored through the night and into the morning, where we shared many laughs watching terrible late night TV shows. And there was, of course, the baby who had a schedule of her own. And she arrived at home before the midwives and before the paramedics could make it. Together with her extended family, we were able to quickly set up what we would need, including warm, dry blankets that had just come out of the dryer. I was asked in that moment, and in many moments, to be the non-anxious presence, the calm in the storm, and to trust the process. And I dare think it worked. Mom had asked me to catch her baby, and by a small miracle, since doulas are not clinical care providers, I had one, just one sterile glove in my backpack. Now, as I was preparing to leave a few hours later, Mom turned to me and asked, how many times have I had to act in this capacity? And I had to confess that her baby was the first. Whether my work took me to a home or a hospital, I knew I was on holy ground. And one day, everything changed. It was a typical January day, and I was on call for 2 birthing families. We had had a fair amount of snowfall, and the schools were closed for 2 days in a row. Now, the next day, when the schools had opened again, my daughter, who was 6.5 at the time, woke up with a tummy ache. And so she stayed home from school. But within the hour, we were at the hospital. And before the day was over, I was holding my daughter as she took her last breaths. To say that this turned my life upside down would be an understatement. Now, when it came to work, I asked my colleagues to cover the births I had in the coming weeks and months so I could tend to my own grief. I knew I wouldn't be able to be fully present with another in that way. But there was also growth happening behind the scenes. Life had slowed down to the bare essentials. And this time of reflection also revealed something to me. I thought I was functioning rather well, but in reality, I was keeping several parts of myself hidden. My life remained compartmentalized, each version of my identity coming out in its own setting. One of those identities, which only came out in specific places with trusted people, was my deeply spiritual nature. This had been part of my life from a very young age and something that I nurtured myself, as I had a family that was not religious or spiritual. Now, after a few months of not working and feeling unsure if I could go back to birth work, I turned to the military for some employment options, at least for a time, because you still have to pay the bills. So I had been running my own business for a number of years, and I decided to apply for a role in public affairs or communications, just as a summer contract. Now, it turns out that the work came naturally, and the leadership saw that. And off to public affairs school I went. And that led to a full-time position in a headquarters here on the base. It was here where I provided advice to senior leadership about crisis situations. And life, once again, had begun to settle. And little did I know what would be around the next corner. The first 2 weeks at the school in Gatineau, Quebec, we were taking a class on the government, where in one of the readings they defined the word minister as one who serves. Everything stopped. It was as if the proverbial light bulb went off in my head. I was certainly no longer listening to the instructor, but revisiting the path which my life had taken to that point. A minister, one who serves. To work in the military is often spoken of as being in service. And a doula is actually a Greek word meaning woman's servant. Everything I had been doing in my life made sense. It had nothing to do with the formal job title I held, but it was about the calling that would be lived out in many ways. I had unlocked a new understanding of who I was. Now, being called to a life of service is one thing, and I knew it wasn't going to always be as a public affairs officer. There was that inner desire to apply for a Master of Divinity. And I had toyed with it before, but this time I decided I would apply, and I was accepted. But I still didn't know where this call was going to go. It wasn't until 2 years later that it became clear, as I sat in a tent outside of Ottawa in Connaught Ranges, checking my emails. I was reading an advanced copy of the newest defense policy. In this copy, it explained that the military was aspiring to be more diverse in its understanding of religion and spirituality. Couldn't Unitarian Universalism have something to offer here? And that's when I knew I needed to embark on this journey to become a military chaplain. I share with you this deeply personal story, not to draw attention to my own personal journey, but to outline the way that this discernment happens, with its joys and its sorrows. I know that right now, it's a difficult time for many, if not all of us. Our lives have taken a sudden turn, and we don't exactly know how long this will last, or what life will look like on the other side of this pandemic. We are also doing a lot of grieving, individually and collectively. And this includes the many losses, those of our hopes and our plans for the future. And the process of going through discernment isn't an easy one. It's trying. We also don't get to see the journey each of our lives will take from start to finish. It would be easier that way. We live in uncertainty. Now, we do our best to lay out our plans and to think ahead of what may come, but we are never 100% prepared for everything. Just as when we head outside at night under the streetlights, the lights only illumine enough to see that next step, the next section. We are only revealed the next part of the journey, and we build upon it from there. As we contend with this uncomfortable reality, our spiritual response must be one of cultivating hope, because it is hope that will help us weather whatever may come our way. This is what we do here together as Unitarian Universalists. We draw hope from our foundations and from our sources. I have given it a fair amount of thought as I prepare to minister in a multi-religious setting. How might I define God, the divine, or the spirit of life? I think that God, or the divine, is something that is life-giving. Whether you see that as God, or a creative spirit, or the creative spirit within, something that helps renew you, So that could be nature or art. Maybe you're a storyteller. But I do wonder, how are we all cultivating that hope in these times of uncertainty? It is my hope for all of us that we stay connected to our truth and to what gives us meaning. And may we continue to share these moments with one another, because we are beacons of hope for each other. Even when our journeys are not going in the same direction, we need the company of good hearts to remind us that we are not journeying alone. Blessed be, and amen.
Nicole, thank you so much. This is,
You stop the recording.
okay. Let's stop the recording here.